Hi everybody, and welcome to another day as we talk about dreams. These dreams of God that God has put in our hearts, not for our prominence, but to live significant lives for God, for His glory, not ours. Now today we're in Exodus, in a part of the Bible that most people have heard about. Even if they've never read the Bible, most people have heard of the Red Sea story. Now there's a lot of drama in today's reading. I hope you read it. It's a fantastic read. But as you read that whole story, there's a few things I want to point out. Three things in particular about how the people responded when they came up against an obstacle. Now, yesterday we talked about how dreams get diverted because of rejection. Today we want to talk about how dreams get diverted because of obstacles. Things that get in the way. Sometimes we can't even see past those obstacles that we have to say, you turned around because the obstacle was so great. Many of us can look into the past and say, I remember those moments when everything fell apart. I remember when that obstacle caused me to not move forward in my dreams. Some of us can relate to this story because the people of Israel saw an obstacle before them that they had no options. God had to intervene or else nothing would happen. They had, if you read the story, Pharaoh's army behind them, and Pharaoh's army would have been the greatest army in those days. They had the greatest technology in those days. They had chariots and they had all kinds of things. And the people of Israel had nothing. And so they had Pharaoh's army going on behind them, and in front of them was the Red Sea. Everything was leading them to the point where if God didn't move, if God didn't act, the dream would die. That's what obstacles do. When we get to obstacles, they are moments when we see the power of God at work in us and through us. Chris and I have been married 14 years. We have so many stories where God worked on our behalf, but the stories that come to mind immediately for me are the stories that we walked through when we were walking through the journey with our daughter Asha. And in so many ways and so many times, there were obstacles that we just couldn't see past. And there were times when I would just sit there and go, God, if you don't do something, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't have a good answer. I don't have any options. Here I am. Figuratively, the Egyptian army is behind me. The Red Sea is ahead of me. God, you've got to make a way somewhere, somehow. And that's what the response that God wants from us when we get to obstacles. However, so often we're like the people in the story. Now, if you look at what happened to the people in the story, number one, first of all, it says they went out defiantly, or in your translation, it may say they went out boldly. Sometimes our dreams start there, don't they? Defiant and bold, and we can do this, and we get all pumped up and excited and activated and energized. And then the obstacle comes in our way. So they went out boldly, then they hit the obstacles, and when they hit the obstacles, step 3, they despaired. In fact, they said to Moses, why did you bring us out here to die? We could have died in Egypt. It was much better to die in Egypt. We could have lived in slavery. And they started to think and dream about the times of slavery. The people of Israel were in such bad shape, their dreams so diverted that they were willing to go back to slavery. They were looking at it as nostalgic. As good times, we were in slavery. Here we're going to die in the desert, they said to Moses. They despaired. Many times when we hit obstacles, we begin to despair, particularly the kind of obstacles where we see no options. And it's in those moments that faith is activated. It's in those moments that God, He's always at His best, but in our lives, we see it so powerfully, God's work in our lives. Moses says to the people 3 things. Number 1, don't be afraid. It is natural to be afraid. For good reason he said that, because again, Egyptian army behind me, Red Sea in front of me, nowhere to go. Definite either death or back to slavery, and things would be worse. They had good reason to be afraid. And when the obstacles get in your way, you may have good reason to be afraid and to despair. But Moses says to the people, don't be afraid. The only reason that Moses would have for saying that, the only reason for that statement to be valid, is if that fear is replaced with faith. And that's what Moses is telling the people. He says, trust God. Something amazing is about to happen. God's going to do something. Number 2, he says, stand still. Because when we face obstacles, one of the temptations is to somehow ram through them, somehow figure out a way around them. Dreams get diverted because sometimes we've tried to figure out our way around the obstacle. Sometimes we need to stand still, not sit still and lay back, but stand still in readiness for what God's about to do. Stand still in active participation. God's about to move and I'm ready to go, but God, you're going to do something about this obstacle. I believe it. I'm praying for it. And Moses says to the people, stand still. And finally, he says, see the salvation of the Lord. That's so powerful. See, our dreams are not about us. God's going to bring them to pass for His kingdom's sake. The significance is not even for our significance. The significance is so that we would be significant for God's glory. And so, it is His salvation that is the basis of all this dreaming. It's His salvation that caused us to have a relationship with Him. And Moses tells the people, he says, don't be afraid. He says, stand still. And he says, see the salvation of the Lord. My time is short, but I have story after story after story after story. And when I think of my daughter Asha, her name means hope, of how the Lord taught me to hope in Him through the seasons where we hit obstacle after obstacle, and we watched God part Red Sea after Red Sea. God's in the business of making His dreams, God dreams, come true. And so as we see that, as we stand firm, as we say, God, I'm not going to fear, I'm not going to be afraid, I'm going to stand firm, we will see the salvation of the Lord at play. God bless you, and I pray that you would say that's true of my life. Again, God bless you, and have a dream-filled day.